Thank you. I am now, I think.
Yep, seems good.
Okay. So people are having conversations about questions and the challenge in asking questions, how asking questions is hard. And so we thought it'd be useful to have a webinar around this idea of asking good questions. So I will be taking a piece of the webinar, and then Alex, who is here along with us, he's our product development guy, is one of the Coach Approach partners, and Alex will develop the webinar and he'll be leading much of it.
Hello.
So we're going to, as I say, make this as conversational as possible. We want to get you all into the conversation, so we'll be stopping at several different points to bring you in, and I'll unmute you all at that time. If you want to use the chat, you'll probably need to hit escape and then just jump into the chat. So that'll make your screen smaller, and you'll be out of my full screen. And as I mentioned, we were just in Luzerne County last week. Sherry was along and Mark for that. And we had a wonderful time in Wilkes-Barre with that group and Joe Kloss's folks. So thank you, Joe. And so welcome to the Wilkes-Barre team, the Luzerne folks. Also welcome to Mechanicsburg folks and two of our Harrisburg groups. So as you remember, we like to start by getting centered. And so we'll just do a brief centering practice, very brief centering practice, and then we'll jump into the webinar. Hopefully many of you have been practicing this. I'll look forward to hearing your stories about it. Right now, just notice yourself in your chair. Just become aware that you're sitting in your chair and feel your feet on the floor. Just pay attention to your feet. That's great. And as you do that, let your breath drop so it's not as high up in your chest, that it can be more in your belly. Something important for us to remember is we can put our attention anywhere we want. So when we're feeling stressed, we can bring our attention to our breath. And how about if we just do a quick 4 count in, hold, 4 count out, just for a few rounds. Four count inhale, hold, 4 count exhale. Four count inhale. And exhale. 4 count in. And exhale. Great. Something as quick as that can shift our nervous system and relax us. So thank you for centering with me as we start our time together. To remind you of the coach approach, for some of you, this is very fresh. For others, it's been a while. And we talked about this the last time in our last webinar. We gave a refresh on the coach approach. Today, just to remind you that these are the skill sets. We had a mindset and a skill set, and these are the coach approach skill sets. First, presence, just talked about that. And we're saying that helps us to show up equipped and aware, focused and flexible. Listening to understand, not just listening to respond. Clarifying and reflecting, we talk about how important this is. Rather than just saying, oh, I understand, reflecting back. Is this what you said? Do I have this right? I want to make sure I understand. Asking good questions, we'll talk about that today. Giving feedback, the idea of strengthening others by our supportive feedback. Holding accountability with others, making sure that they're staying on track, letting them know that we're following up with them because what they're doing is important. And then always modeling. We talked about this in every training, that folks are always watching. Are we consistent? Are we doing what we say we're going to do? Are we doing what we say others should do? And this is particularly important as we move into this idea of asking questions, because some of the barriers to our ability to ask questions and others' ability to be comfortable with questions is in this domain of trust. So we had some conversation with you about the barriers to asking questions, and this is what you said. For some of you, there was a sense of, my job is to tell, not to ask. I've been hired to tell people what to do rather than to ask them. And so I'm not doing my job if I'm asking questions. Or maybe there's not enough time. It's much more efficient if I just tell people what to do rather than ask questions. Maybe there's a concern that I'll be triggering defensiveness if I ask questions. People aren't prepared for my questions, or there might be confrontation or skepticism. So it might come from the other person, or it might be our assumptions about asking questions. And we heard this on our last community of practice call, that we might seem rude or nosy or trying to make someone wrong. So I want to just pause here, and I'm going to go back up. I'm going to try to do this. Here we go. I'm going to pause here. I'm going to go back to you all, and I'm going to unmute you and see what conversations you have now about the barriers that you're finding to asking questions. What are some of the barriers you're finding to asking questions? And I've unmuted you all, so anybody can speak at any time.
I think fear. When people ask questions, I think, just speaking for myself, I perceive that someone may think that I don't know something that I should, or that so yeah. So I guess it's like, if I don't know, it's my job to kind of find out. And it becomes harder to ask questions when you think that people think that you're either not observant, or to something that they feel may be obvious, or you're not capable, or something to that ilk.
Yes, yeah, Jamal. So that fear of asking questions, because if I ask a question, I might look stupid. I mean,
Right.
Paraphrasing what you're saying, right? Yeah, and that's a scary one, isn't it? Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a scary one. I mean, you think about what can happen if we need more information and we don't ask a question. We're stuck. We're really stuck, right? So we want to be, that's great to notice that and know that other people may feel that way. And then a question from a coach approach is, how do we make it really easy for other people to ask us questions? How do we create a question-loving culture, right? How do we create that? One of the things I like to suggest, and I'll suggest it now, is instead of asking, do you have any questions? And we all know what the right answer is to do you have any questions, right? Everybody, what's the right answer to do you have any questions?
Nope.
Nope. No. So instead, can we ask, what questions do you have? I know you're going to have questions. What questions do you have? So this idea of building a question-loving culture. We're not mind readers. I don't think any mind readers on the call. I don't think anybody's a mind reader. Right. What other barriers can you identify, other folks on the call, that you'd like to share?
I think sometimes the perception of when you ask questions is that you disagree with the person who you're asking the question to. as opposed to just trying to figure out if you really do understand what it is they're saying. But I think others interpret that as disagreeing with their positions.
Isn't that interesting? So that they hear the question as disagreeing. You know, one of the strategies, and Alex is an improviser. You want to mention the yes and, Alex?
Yeah. So when from the coach, so I'll sort of merge it with the coach approach. So when we're talking about partnerships and working in the unknown, we're talking about how can we ask questions in a way that recognizes their essential contributions to the partnership, but then also not leaving on the table our own expertise and the skills that we have, that we bring. So we're going to have a couple of examples of questions in our presentation, and we can give you more later on, but questions that really emphasize keeping the partnership intact, not asking somebody what they think for the purpose of then sharing what we think, but instead asking people what they think from genuine curiosity, so that we take as much in our hands as they're comfortable to share with us, but then we also put it back on them to, continue to be the experts in themselves. So that's a phrase that I like to use a lot, is they're always the experts in themselves, and to come to their doorstep with all the knowledge in the world. We don't know what their life is like, or the challenges that they face, all the strengths that they have. So to ask questions that really evoke who they are so that they can contribute is essential.
Yeah. And we want to yes and when they, if we do have something to say or question to ask, I think the place to start is yes rather than but. Start with yes rather than but. Yes, and I have a question for you about that, rather than yes, but what about, right? So watching the but, that's what they say, watch out for the big but. We have a couple of Zoom questions. Sometimes we want to ask questions that are non-judgmental, questions that don't come across as judging, absolutely. Sometimes people are afraid of what you will do with the information that they share. Yeah. All those things are true. All those things are true. And I think those can be real barriers to asking questions. And then we get stuck, right? We get stuck. Because it's really important to ask questions. And we're saying building trust is key. So I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to quickly mute everybody for just a second. And mute. Okay, there we go. So we're talking about this idea of building trust. That we're saying trust is not something built in a day or something that is transactional. So trust is long-standing, and that 80-20 rule of giving people positive feedback, more positive than negative, that absolutely supports this idea of building trust. And SCARF, right? Remember SCARF, and we'll talk about it again, but the idea of preserving someone's status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Super important concepts and things for us always to be paying attention to, because you remember from the David Rock video, we are, first of all, he says, we are meaning-making machines. And he also says, if we're going to err, we're going to err on the side of mistrust. We're going to start off by thinking there's a threat. We're going to lean to the side of threat. So we have to work extra hard. And we talked about this, I think, in every one of the trainings. We have to work extra hard. People are coming into us not trusting. They're coming into our organizations with bad experiences, but perhaps bad family lives, challenging family lives. So we have to work extra, extra hard to create what we're calling psychological safety. And this is Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety. And you see the psychological danger here to the left. People afraid, not asking questions, but they're not going to ask questions. They're afraid to admit mistakes. They're blaming others. As others are blamed, people are less likely to share different views. And then the common knowledge effect of, we're not going to ask questions outside of what we already know. We're not going to do anything different. We're not going to break out of the pattern that we're in. All we're paying attention, well, I'll say all, much of what we're paying attention to is how safe am I? This is a much bigger conversation than we're having today, but just to plant the seed around this idea of psychological safety. And I'm curious, we'll hear in a minute if this is resonating for some of you. How safe am I? And how do we help people feel safe? So what Amy Edmondson says is that as people feel comfortable in asking questions, in making mistakes, admitting mistakes. I mean, obviously, we don't want people making mistakes right or left. But if something does happen, we absolutely want to know about it, right? People need to feel safe in saying what's true for them. And having a culture where we ask questions, what can we do differently? We learn from failure, that people are open to sharing ideas. We'll have better innovation and decision making, and people will feel more comfortable in the space. Sorry. So just some tips in terms of building trust, and then we'll open it up and hear how you do this. One piece is asking for permission, especially around this idea of asking questions. So for some people, just having the permission asked is a tremendous offer of respect. We might ask, may I offer an additional perspective on that? So someone says something and we're thinking, I'm not sure I agree with that. But rather than saying, I disagree, may I offer an additional perspective? Or may I ask a question about that? So asking permission kind of knocks on the door so that they know it's coming, and they've also said, yes, come in. We might also acknowledge a cultural perspective on questions and say, look, I know in the past I haven't asked questions a lot, but I would like to be doing that more because I want to build on your critical thinking skills. Or I might say, I know we've been socialized that asking questions is rude. And so, I realize that's probably why I don't ask you enough questions about what your thinking is, what your ideas are. I want to do better with that. And then going back to the SCARF model, we're saying as we pay attention to all of those status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness, as we honor people's status, we're paying attention to them, how important it is for them to be seen. Just this idea of I see you, how important that is. That can really help in building trust. So I'm going to stop there.
So before we get into that question,
Sure.
Just want to highlight a particular point. Is just
Sure.
like in the coach approach, how you do this is important that it's uniquely in your way.
Yes.
So that you ask these questions, that's the way that you show up and congruent in that. Otherwise, it's going to seem like a little bit of a disconnect, and people might feel like they're being put through a particular process.
Yeah, good.
So, for example, what I do is I say, you're the expert on you. You're going to know more about yourself than I ever could. So being able to talk about what your plans are, how you see things, what you're able to do, that's just so helpful. Now that works for me, that may not work for you. But just as we talk about how we build trust, we might hear a lot of different answers. People might say, I wouldn't do that, but that doesn't make it work any less.
Okay, so opening up, thank you. Opening it up, how do you all build trust? What do you do? What have you found that works? And everyone is unmuted.
Being true to your word.
Doing what you say you're going to do and being true to your word, very, very important. Yeah. What else?
I have found that finding common ground, like I said, I talk to people on the phone the majority of the time. So some things that work for me is, and they're part of what I need to do, where in Pennsylvania is this person from? What county? Do they live in a rural part? Is it a farming community? Do you see what I mean? because a lot of times that gives me insights into culture. And a lot of people, quite frankly, that are more conservative seem to be more nervous about expressing their views if they're from a certain part of our state. And then it's the opposite. If you know what I mean, we're in a very sort of like tenuous place when it comes to belief systems and things like that. So people are sometimes very unsure about anything that may dance close to something that could be interpreted as liberal or conservative, to be, you know, bring out the elephant in my room anyway. And I have to try to, well, none of that matters. You know what I mean? I have to let them know that this is a solid playing ground. We're all on the same level. It doesn't matter if you're pink, purple, pale, or, you know, dark. It doesn't matter. These problems transcend everything, and making sure everybody's kind of like understands the leveling field. Then people, you know, and I mean, it's not like something I launch into. It's something that usually something they say or the way they say something clues me in. Okay, I may need to sort of like work my way into these waters carefully and see if this is an issue.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point, and thank you for sharing that. You know, again, David Rock says we err on the side of mistrust. You know, it's unfortunate, isn't it? But we're looking for threat, so
Yeah.
we have to really work hard to find those opportunities to let people feel safe. To really be mindful about that. And I keep bumping my screen. So what other thoughts do you have?
I think the ability to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
showing people that I'm human just as they are, helps with earning trust. I think especially if you're in a position of authority, or if you have people that you supervise, things of that nature. I think one of the things that I do to gain trust is to let them know that just because I may be in a position to be your supervisor doesn't necessarily mean that I know everything.
Yeah, great.
So, you know, letting them know that I'm just as human as them. I'm going to make mistakes. If I do make a mistake, I expect them to call me out on it, and vice versa. So we build this relationship that it's not, you know, me up here and you down here. We're all on level playing field, and, you know, we can move from there. So I think being able to show vulnerability is a large part in that for me.
Yeah, that's great. What a great idea, being able to show that vulnerability. Beautiful. Great. Okay, we're going to go. Alex is going to pick it up from here and talking about the case to make good questions.
Sure. So I just want to address the chat and just talk about how honesty, partnering, transparency, clarity, asking for feedback, all great ways to build trust. So the case for good questions. When we talk about asking questions from a coach approach, for the sake of what, the answer to that question is to serve a person who is dealing with challenging situations. We're not asking questions as a means to an end to get our own ideas across, or as a way to sneak in ideas or put a person through a process, but instead really as service to someone else and their experience and getting through a particular challenging situation. There are a lot of great books about this idea of questions for the sake of service, humble inquiry, servant leadership among them. So things to check out on your Amazon after the webinar. The second case for good questions is to help others think through problems and become more powerful in their lives. Oftentimes, challenges that people have are very complex or complicated and seem just so overwhelming. The experience of somebody sitting down and listening and talking with a person and walking them through, okay, what's step by step, what can you do, can make those complex and complicated situations a little bit more manageable. And as a result, people can walk through lives feeling more powerful and more equipped to address the oncoming complexities. Third case for good questions is to reveal information and solutions that we couldn't see before our conversation. This doesn't mean necessarily offering your own perspective, but asking questions that they haven't thought of before, or seeing a situation in a different way that they haven't seen before, can be really powerful in getting someone unstuck. And this still means that the answers come from them, but in a way that without your questions, they wouldn't have seen their situation in that particular way, or wouldn't have experienced something that particular way. The last case for good questions is to help them see their situation in an entirely new way. So we went over that a little bit in the third bullet.
I'm coming.
So questions to avoid. So as we talked about with building trust and the transparency and the honesty and the partnering, if we hold those values, there are certainly questions that we want to avoid. So one of those questions is when we already know the answer to what we're asking. So that's not a genuine question. If there's a perception that your behavior in anything, especially in your questions, isn't genuine, they might believe that the other things that the other ways that you're interacting with them might not be genuine either. So that is a really quick way to erode trust. Similarly, questions to avoid would be giving advice in disguise. That would mean questions like, have you thought about this? Or have you talked to this person? That's a question, but really it's a suggestion. And I think people can sniff that out. So that also can affect your level of trust with another person by doing that. Another question to avoid is when you're not interested in their answer. If you're asking them about even something like their family and you're not interested in their answer and it's just a formality, they might assume that that means that you don't care about them or their success or their progress. So important that when you ask those questions that you're genuinely interested in their answer. That's part of building partnership. And the finally questions to avoid would be asking things like, why don't you trust me? Or any other why questions. Hopefully, when you're asking questions, it's not necessarily questions that reflect on you or questions that reflect on what has been done in the past. That might put them on the defensive. So instead, asking questions about going forward and asking questions that really center around them and their situation. So here are some examples of good questions from the coach approach. In this slide, we're taking commonly asked questions that I'm sure we've all heard a million times and refining them slightly into a coaching approach questions. So the first one is, have you tried blank? We're saying that that's a question, that's advice in disguise. So instead, from a coach approach, what have you tried and what might you try or what could you try? Common question might be, isn't that bad or isn't that scary? That's putting your own perspective onto their situation. So you might be giving them something that you might think is good news, but they could take it in a completely different way. So instead, a coach approach question might be, how do you feel about this? Or how might you feel if something happens? If they're developing an action plan or a solution, how might you feel if this happens? Common question might be, should you go talk to so-and-so about that? Again, it's advice in disguise. So coach approach question was, how might you prepare yourself for a conversation, or what resources might you need? Why are you angry? I think that's a very quick way to get somebody probably even angrier because it can put somebody on the defensive. Coach approach question might be, how are you feeling? Or you look like you might be angry, is that right? Now, obviously, if they're red in the face and they're screaming, it's a little bit disingenuous to say you look like you might be angry. So we're always sort of holding that value of honesty, but we also want to let them control and express their emotions. And if they're angry, there might be some worthy piece of information in that anger that can give you a lot of information that might be able to lead to a conclusion or resolution quickly. Sometimes anger is something that people want to avoid, but oftentimes it can hold a lot of information. And then the last common question is, why did you do that? Again, past looking and can trigger defensiveness. The coach approach question could be, what are you going to do differently next time? Again, inherent in that is holding on to the belief that people are able to change and that mistakes don't define a person, but you can move forward together.
And just inviting you all to notice what is the questions start with on the coach approach questions side, and there are famous what and how. We make a big point of that, that those are the powerful questions. Those are the good questions, questions that start with what and how.
Okay, so we'll just do a couple more slides on question categories, and then we'll open it up for questions. So good questions that open. So from my experience, oftentimes when people use the coach approach, they often use questions that get people toward a solution as quickly as possible. So that can be risky for a couple of ways. One is that people might be solving the wrong issue. And two, people might be picking the first situation or the first solution to their problem instead of opening up to other things. So questions that open. What options do you see? A bunch of options that people have choice and can choose from. What barriers are you facing? What might be in the way? What else might be in the way? What else might be important to you in a situation? And how might you do that? How else might you do that? This allows for people to really explore different options, and using our good listening skills, you might find that people have a lot more energy toward something else than what you originally thought. That can be an indicator that the other thing is more important, or a second solution has more energy behind it than the first one that they thought of. So questions that open are really important. The opposite would be questions that close. So these are questions that drive people toward a particular outcome or resolution, even if it's just a first step. So questions like, what is a first step? When can you take that step? What resources do you need? How can I support you? When can I follow up with you? Those are all around taking the complexity or the complicated situation that they have and boiling it down to making it actionable. So other considerations for good questions. So just like closing questions, I think there's also an overemphasis in questions around a particular situation or challenge. So questions like,
Oh. Alex,
like what might your barriers be to a particular plan? Yeah, yes.
okay, you're fine. That was just a funny muddled speech part. So just go ahead back with what might the barriers be to your plan. We just lost you for a minute.
Okay. So questions around the situations could be, what might barriers be to your plan? What can you do to avoid this situation in the future? And what resources do you need to make that happen? But there's also really good opportunities to ask questions focused around the person who's in the challenging situation. How are they feeling about that situation? What are they noticing about themselves as you hear yourself talk? And how might you want to show up in future situations like this? Oftentimes, when people are experiencing a problem, people can feel like means to ends, or they can feel like they're responsible, and that can really affect their scarf. It can really affect how they're showing up and in their interactions with you. It can affect things like partnership and transparency and all the things that we talked about earlier that are important. So asking person-centered focused questions don't just maintain trust, but actually they can also offer solutions. It's not uncommon that sometimes the solution to a situation is a person choosing to show up a different way, or choosing to have a different outlook on a situation as opposed to doing something differently. So being open to that and asking questions around the person can be very powerful. So we talked about questions that open and close, and we've talked about questions that are situation focused and person focused. So we want to give a little bit of time to ask you, what questions do you have about those categories, and if that makes sense.
And everybody's unmuted now. What thoughts do you have? The idea of looking at questions that open, not just questions that close, and questions that are person focused, not just questions that are situation focused.
Well, I'm thinking about the situation that Alex brought up about the red-faced, white-knuckled kind of thing, and, not stating the obvious, tell me how you're feeling. Would a question in that situation be better to intellectualize, like, please tell me what you're thinking right now, instead of feeling, to try and bring them to a cognitive, I don't know, I'm trying to figure out how to, again, you don't want to state the obvious because it might make them angrier, but you also want to get them past that and get to the root, because usually anger comes from hurt or fear.
Yeah.
Hmm?
Yeah.
Right. Right. Do you want to take this one, Beth, or do you want me to go for it?
So I'm just thinking about that. It's an interesting one. I mean, when someone is really, really angry, what's the most important thing to do? And I guess what comes to mind for me is acknowledging the anger. And then your idea of saying, tell me how you're thinking. I really want to hear how you're thinking about that. How are you thinking about it? That could be an interesting way to approach it. What other thoughts do people have? Everybody's unmuted, so you can just go ahead and talk if you have a thought.
Yeah, this is Mark. I think for me, I think one of the things that I think about is, first and foremost, is it does start with the relationship that you have with the person to begin with, and how has that relationship been over time? Because sometimes if it's one of these things where it's a long-standing history of things, and if you kind of go into those questions about kind of, hey, how is this affecting you, or how is this going forward, could definitely escalate it. So I think it's first and foremost, it's understanding where that relationship is coming from, and where where the history comes with it, and then from there, I think that acknowledging that you are understanding, or you are seeing this emotion, because they might sometimes not even realize that they might be coming across that way. So I think there's two things that come to mind for me, would be like, for me, that's how I may try to read it, is first off, understand the history, and then advising, or just kind of saying, this is what I'm seeing. Is that correct?
Great.
I would add that, going along with the idea of recognition, sometimes I think perhaps the idea is almost not to move past it, but to really investigate it and understand it, so that you acknowledge the fear and the confusion, and there's an opportunity maybe to follow that and understand where that comes from. The risk of moving past it too quickly, I think, could be that they hold on to that fear and confusion, and even if they're not yelling, they can still be preoccupied with those, with that anger and those ideas. So part of being heard, part of allowing them to be heard, and the partnership is, maybe sitting with them and letting them be angry and letting them express themselves. And I know it can be a little bit uncomfortable, but it goes to that place of psychological safety, of allowing people to, let's call it allowing the mistake of yelling, or allowing the mistake of people getting really hot and saying, okay, this happened. And, if this is something to, is this the relationship that we want to have, or what do I need to do to help you out with this? And then maybe what are things that they can do to do it? I don't know. But I think modeling authenticity and transparency about how you're feeling is also of paramount importance. And allowing people to feel the way that they feel is also of equal importance.
Great. Good.
Yeah, this is Ellen. I'd love to jump just to add one more thing to, hi everybody, add something to what Alex said, and just to remind ourselves that our voice is but one tool that we have in the coach approach, that if you go back to presence and lean in a little bit to express your intimacy with the person you're talking to and your own vulnerability about their vulnerability, your body and your presence may actually be even more important than what actual words come out of your mouth.
Yeah, that's so true. That's really, really true. Yeah. And yeah, so anything else that you want to add? I just put the Zoom up, and thank you for your Zoom comments. Anything else that you want to add before we just roll to the some last words here and then the practice? Anything else around questioning? How are you all doing with your what and how questions? How is anybody doing with their what and how question?
Hi, everybody. This is
say
Maureen.
I'm getting a lot better the more that I practice with the what and how questions.
Excellent. Others?
Who just was speaking? Who was that?
Larissa Kimmel.
Hi,
Oh,
Larissa.
Larissa. Great, good for you. Who else?
I was just going to say that
Yep.
I do better with the what and how now, understanding that when it all comes from a place of authenticity and it's a genuine curiosity, people get that and they understand that. And it's very important that that's where it comes from. I say it over and over again, but it's always the why am I talking? And for what reason am I asking this question, and ensuring that it's not a personal gain, but it's actually to help the person get to where they need to get to.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Swanine. Okay, so Alex has one more slide. I have one more slide, and then we'll send you back to your day.
Okay, so just as sort of a wrap up, we're not asking just about a task, but about them and their thoughts and their feelings and their family, and not just as a person that is in the way of getting something done, but recognizing the human side of the who that they are. Really important. Asking questions that keep control in their hands as much as possible, so that people can feel empowered, recognized for the good work that they're doing. Very important. Asking questions about how they want you to support them. Again, ideas about not just going through a process and feeling like control is out of their hands, but putting control in their hands as much as possible. And lastly, remember to follow up. So if you make a commitment to them, it's really important that you take it extremely seriously, because otherwise your trust completely plummets and they're going to be really reluctant to share anything with you in the future, because why would they if they don't believe it's going to help them? So that's it for the other tips. Does anybody have any questions? Or Beth, did you have a thing to add to this segment?
Well, I think it goes back to always modeling, Alex.
Yeah.
This is the piece that we just want to remind people of, which doesn't mean we have to be perfect. And as you all said, being vulnerable is true. We're all going to make mistakes, and we're going to not show up perfectly all the time. Who wants to be around a perfect person anyway? I mean, so I don't know that perfection is the goal, but to be very aware that we're always showing up, and then we can choose to be intentional. We can choose to be present, as Ellen said. We can choose to intend to listen. We can choose to intend to ask questions, which doesn't mean we're cross-examining them. I think in some cases, people hear about questions and they think, oh my gosh, you're talking about interrogating them or cross-examining them. No, it's curiosity to help them develop their critical thinking skills and to really get good at asking questions. What, how, open-ended questions that open conversations, person-focused, not just situation-focused. All of these are tools you can use to build out your questioning repertoire, as well as we said at the beginning, making it really easy for people to ask you questions by asking, what questions do you have? What questions do you have? So I'm going to close with your homework. You have homework. I know, that's sort of the way it goes, right? Before the next call, we're going to be with Ellen on May 13th from 2 to 3 for our second community of practice call. We'll have a bridge between now and then, so we want you to be doing what you can as you use more open questions that open-ended questions, questions that open, and person-focused questions that start with the words what or how. And as we prepare for the community practice call, just think about and just prepare to share the results of asking questions in this way. So with that, I'm going to stop the share. All right, so we should all see each other now. There we are. Hello, everybody. It's nice to see you. I'm going to do my best to get you all seeing each other. Oh, I can't because we're stopping the share. So you're on your own in terms of what you're seeing. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. And I want to just unmute you all so that you can all say goodbye to each other. Thanks for being with us. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. See you next
You all
month.
in May. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye. All right. Is anybody still on? Oh, a whole bunch of people are still on. Okay. If you don't know how to leave, there's a little button on the bottom that says end meeting down there on the right-hand side. And all right, you're finding it. End meeting. There you go. Down the bottom. Alex is still on. Dwanine's still on. A few people still on. Now, Mark, you can stay on if you want to. We'd love to get your feedback. And Ellen too. Alex, no?
No, he's gone.
All right.
Oh, Ellen's gone too.
Ellen's gone. Oh, that's
You might
true.
want to stop recording.
Oh, yeah, good idea.